My son's school called, "Your boy just sent 3 students to the ER with broken bones." The principal's voice was shaking when she called at 3:47 p.m. "Mr. Whitmore, you need to get to Riverside High immediately. Your son Caleb put 3 students in the hospital. Broken arm, fractured ribs, shattered collarbone. The ambulances just left. Police are here." I stared at my phone trying to process the words. Caleb was 15 and weighed maybe 140 pounds soaking wet. He'd never been in a fight, never had detention. Honor roll student who spent weekends coding video games in his room. This had to be a mistake. "I'm on my way," I managed to say. The drive took 12 minutes but felt like hours. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. Caleb couldn't have done this. He was the kid who cried when his hamster died in 5th grade, the kid who refused to play contact sports because he didn't like hurting people. Something was terribly wrong. The school parking lot was chaos. 3 police cars, an ambulance still loading someone, news vans already setting up, parents everywhere looking terrified and angry. I pushed through the crowd toward the main entrance where 2 officers stood blocking the doors. "I'm Caleb Whitmore's father," I said. They exchanged looks. One spoke into his radio. The other said, "Principal Davis is waiting inside with your son." My stomach dropped. Inside, the hallway was empty except for more police. They led me to the principal's office where I saw Caleb sitting in a chair with his head down. His shirt was torn, blood on his knuckles, a bruise forming on his cheek. But what stopped me cold was his expression. Complete blankness, like he wasn't even there. Principal Davis stood when I entered. Her face was pale. "Mr. Whitmore, your son attacked 3 students without provocation during lunch period. Witnesses say he just snapped. Started throwing punches, broke Mitchell Hayes' arm in 2 places, cracked Austin Murphy's ribs, dislocated and fractured Liam Foster's collarbone. The boys are at Memorial Hospital now." I looked at Caleb. He didn't move, didn't look up, just sat there breathing slowly like he was somewhere else entirely. "That's not possible," I said. Caleb wouldn't. "There has to be an explanation." The officer stepped forward. "We have 12 eyewitnesses and cafeteria security footage. Your son initiated the violence. The other boys were sitting at their lunch table when he approached them and started swinging. I felt like the floor was tilting. None of this made sense." "Caleb," I said, "what happened?" He finally looked up at me. His eyes were empty. "I don't remember," he said quietly. "One minute I was getting my lunch. Next thing I know, teachers were pulling me off them." Principal Davis cleared her throat. "Mr. Whitmore, Caleb is being suspended pending investigation. The police want to question him. Given the severity of the injuries, charges will likely be filed. I need you to take him home while we sort this out. The parents of the injured boys are threatening lawsuits. This is an extremely serious situation." I signed paperwork I barely read and walked Caleb to my car. He moved like a robot, got in the passenger seat and stared straight ahead. The drive home was silent. I kept glancing at him trying to understand. This wasn't my son. Something had happened to him. We pulled into our driveway and he got out without a word, walked straight to his room and closed the door. I stood in the hallway feeling lost. My phone started ringing. Unknown number. I answered. "Mr. Whitmore, this is Detective Patricia Vance. I need to schedule a formal interview with your son regarding today's incident. 3 victims, multiple serious injuries. We're treating this as aggravated assault, possible juvenile charges. Can you bring Caleb to the station tomorrow at 10 a.m.? I said yes, because what else could I say? After hanging up, I called my wife Denise at work. She was a nurse at the same hospital where the injured boys had been taken. When I told her what happened, she went silent. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. "Mitchell Hayes is in surgery right now. His arm was shattered so badly they're not sure he'll regain full use of it. Austin Murphy has 3 broken ribs and a punctured lung. Liam Foster's collarbone was completely displaced. These aren't normal schoolyard fight injuries. These are someone trying to cause maximum damage." I hung up and knocked on Caleb's door. No answer. I tried the handle. Locked. "Caleb, we need to talk. Please." Nothing. I stood there feeling helpless. An hour later I heard his door open. He came downstairs and sat at the kitchen table. Just sat there staring at his hands. I pulled up a chair across from him. "Son, I need you to tell me what happened. Why did you attack those boys?" He looked up at me, and I saw tears in his eyes for the first time. "Dad, I swear I don't remember. It's like there's this blank space. I remember standing in the lunch line. Then nothing. Then teachers dragging me away and my hands hurt, and there was blood. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I don't know what happened to me." His voice cracked on the last words. I wanted to believe him, but the evidence was overwhelming. 12 witnesses, security footage, 3 boys in the hospital. The school would have the video. I needed to see it before the police interview tomorrow. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Caleb as a kid. He'd always been gentle, never aggressive. In 7th grade, a bully had pushed him down the stairs and Caleb never fought back, just took it. His teachers always commented on how calm and controlled he was. This sudden violence made no sense. At 6 a.m., I called the school and asked to review the security footage. Principal Davis said the police had it, but she could show me the copy they'd made. I drove there immediately. She led me to her office and pulled up the video on her computer. The timestamp showed 12:34 p.m. The cafeteria was crowded with students eating lunch. I spotted Caleb in the lunch line getting a tray. He looked normal, relaxed even. Then he got his food and turned toward the tables. That's when everything changed. His whole body language shifted. He walked directly toward a table where 3 boys were sitting: Mitchell, Austin, and Liam. I recognized them from school events. Caleb walked up and just started throwing punches. No words, no warning, brutal, precise hits. Mitchell's arm bent wrong when Caleb grabbed it and twisted. Austin doubled over when Caleb's elbow caught his ribs. Liam tried to stand, and Caleb shoved him backward into the table edge. His shoulder hit at the worst angle. The whole thing lasted maybe 15 seconds before teachers swarmed in. I watched it 3 times. Caleb's face never changed expression. Mechanical, efficient, like he was following a program. Principal Davis cleared her throat. Mr. Whitmore, I've been doing this job for 18 years. I've seen plenty of school fights. This wasn't a fight. This was an assault. Caleb knew exactly where to hit to cause maximum injury. I felt sick. I need copies of this footage, I said. For our lawyer. She nodded and made me a USB drive. I drove home in a daze. Denise was waiting in the kitchen, looking exhausted. Her shift had ended at midnight, but she'd stayed at the hospital. Mitchell just got out of surgery, she said. They had to put pins in his arm. The surgeon said whoever did this had either training or got extremely lucky with their strikes. Every hit was calculated to break bones. I showed her the security footage on my laptop. We watched in silence. When it ended, Denise looked at me with fear in her eyes. That's not Caleb. I mean, that's physically him, but that's not our son. Something's wrong. Really wrong. At 9:30 a.m., we drove Caleb to the police station. He'd barely spoken since yesterday. Detective Vance met us in an interview room. She was in her 40s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She explained his rights and asked if we wanted a lawyer present. I said yes. We're not answering questions without one. She nodded like she'd expected that. Smart. Given what I've seen, your son is looking at serious charges. 3 counts of aggravated assault. Given his age, juvenile court, but still. These boys have life-altering injuries. I need you to understand the severity. We left without the interview. I called a criminal defense attorney my brother recommended. His name was Graham Foster, and he specialized in juvenile cases. We met him that afternoon at his office downtown. Graham listened to everything, watched the security footage, and leaned back in his chair. This is bad, very bad, but something doesn't add up. He pulled up Caleb's school records on his computer. Honor student. No disciplinary history. No fights. No aggressive incidents. Then suddenly he attacks 3 boys with precision violence. He looked at Caleb. Do you know those boys? Have you had problems with them before? Caleb shook his head. I barely know them. They're juniors. I'm a sophomore. We don't have classes together. I've never even talked to them. Graham made notes. What's the last thing you remember before the incident? Caleb closed his eyes, trying to recall. I was in the lunch line. The lady gave me pizza. I turned to find a seat. Then nothing until teachers were pulling me off them. Graham's eyes narrowed. Nothing? No anger? No argument? Just a complete blank? Caleb nodded. It's like someone edited that part out of my brain. Graham looked at me. I want Caleb evaluated by a neurologist. This kind of sudden violence with memory loss could indicate a medical issue. Seizure disorder, tumor, something neurological. It could be a defense if we can prove he wasn't in control. I felt a flicker of hope. We scheduled an emergency appointment with Dr. Raymond Liu, a neurologist Graham had worked with before. The appointment was the next day. Dr. Liu ran tests for hours, EEG, MRI, cognitive assessments. Caleb sat through it all quietly. When the results came back, Dr. Liu called us into his office looking puzzled. The scans are completely normal. No tumors, no lesions, no signs of seizure activity. Neurologically, Caleb is healthy. However, he pulled up something on his screen. I did find elevated cortisol levels and some markers consistent with extreme stress or trauma. Has something been happening at school? Bullying? Threats? Caleb shook his head. No, everything's been fine. But Dr. Liu's question stuck with me. That night after Caleb went to bed, I did something I probably shouldn't have. I went into his room and looked through his things. His backpack, his desk drawers, his closet. I found his phone charging on his nightstand and picked it up. The lock screen showed dozens of notifications, text messages from numbers I didn't recognize. I opened the phone using the passcode I'd set up when we got it for him. The messages made my stomach turn. The most recent thread was from a number saved as unknown. The texts started 3 weeks ago. I know what you did. You think nobody knows, but I do. Then more. You're going to do exactly what I say or everyone finds out. Photos of Caleb followed. Him walking home from school. Him in his bedroom through the window. Someone had been stalking him. I scrolled through more messages, instructions, specific detailed instructions. Tomorrow at lunch, you're going to approach Mitchell Hayes, Austin Murphy, and Liam Foster. You're going to hurt them, break bones, make them suffer. If you don't, your secret goes public. The messages went on, describing exactly how to strike, where to hit for maximum damage, when to stop before teachers intervened. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped the phone. I scrolled back further looking for this secret they were threatening to expose. Found it in texts from a month ago, photos of Caleb at a party I didn't know about, photos of him holding what looked like drugs, Photos of him passed out on a couch with beer bottles everywhere. The texts from unknown said, "Nice party. Shame if your college applications mentioned this. Shame if your parents saw. Shame if the police got an anonymous tip about underage drinking and drug possession. Someone had framed him or caught him in a bad moment and was using it to blackmail him into committing assault." I took screenshots of everything and immediately called Graham. He answered on the third ring, sounding half asleep. This better be good. I found out why Caleb did it. He was being blackmailed. I sent Graham everything. He called back 10 minutes later, fully awake. This changes everything. We need to go to the police immediately. This is coercion. Caleb's a victim here too. But we had to move fast because whoever unknown was, they were still out there. At 7 a.m. I woke Caleb and showed him the texts. His face went white. Oh God. Dad, I'm so sorry. I didn't know what to do. They said they'd ruin my life. Send those photos to colleges. Get me arrested. I was so scared. Who took those photos? Caleb's voice was barely a whisper. I don't know. I went to one party. One. Some senior invited me. I didn't drink anything. I swear. But I woke up on a couch, and there were bottles and pills everywhere. Someone set me up. Someone had orchestrated everything. The party, the photos, the blackmail, the assault. Caleb was just a pawn. We went to the police station with Graham. Detective Vance listened to everything and examined the screenshots. Her expression darkened with each message. This is extortion and coercion. Caleb's still responsible for the assault, but this gives us a different picture. We need to find out who's behind this number. She got the tech team involved immediately. Meanwhile, I decided to visit the injured boy's parents. I needed to explain what we'd found. Mitchell Hayes' parents refused to see me, slammed the door in my face. Austin Murphy's mom listened for 5 minutes, then said, "I don't care about excuses. Your son put my boy in the hospital." Nothing justifies that. Liam Foster's dad was different. He was a lawyer and listened carefully as I explained about the blackmail. When I finished, he leaned back with a strange expression. That's interesting. Very interesting. Because 3 weeks ago, someone tried to blackmail Liam too. Same kind of photos from a party. Same threats. But Liam told us immediately, and we handled it. I felt my pulse quicken. "Do you still have the messages?" He pulled out his phone and showed me. The format was identical. Same number saved as unknown. Same threatening language. Liam had been told to steal test answers from a teacher's desk or his secret goes public. "But you said you handled it?" "How?" "We contacted the police and a private investigator," Liam's dad said. The investigator traced the party photos back to a student at the school. A senior named Derek Vaughn. He'd been hosting parties specifically to compromise younger students, get them in compromising positions and then blackmail them into doing things. Theft, cheating, violence, creating a network of controlled kids who'd do anything to keep their secrets hidden. I felt rage building. "Derek Vaughn did this to my son?" Liam's dad nodded. "We've been building a case against him for weeks. Your son's situation is the first time it escalated to this level of violence. Derek's getting bolder. We need to stop him before someone gets killed." I took everything straight to Detective Vance. She already had Derek Vaughn's name on her radar from the tech team's investigation. The unknown number was registered to a burner phone, but they'd traced purchases and communications back to Derek. He'd been running this operation for at least 6 months. At least 9 other students had been blackmailed. Some gave him money, some did his homework, some stole things for him. Caleb had been ordered to commit assault because Derek wanted revenge on Mitchell, Austin, and Liam. Apparently, they'd reported Derek for cheating last semester, and he'd gotten suspended. This was his twisted payback using my son as the weapon. The police arrested Derek at school the next day. When they searched his room, they found hard drives full of compromising photos of dozens of students. Party photos, edited images, fake screenshots. His entire blackmail operation documented. They also found journals describing his plans. He'd specifically chosen Caleb because he was small, non-threatening, and had a clean record. The perfect person to carry out violence because nobody would suspect him capable. Derek had studied Caleb for weeks, learned his schedule, his routines, invited him to the party, and drugged his drink, staged the photos while Caleb was unconscious, then waited 3 weeks before starting the blackmail to make sure Caleb didn't connect the party to the threats. Every detail had been calculated. The charges against Derek were extensive. Extortion, coercion, drug distribution, identity theft, contributing to the delinquency of minors. He was 18, so he'd be tried as an adult. His lawyer tried to claim it was just teenage pranks gone too far, but the evidence was overwhelming. Graham worked with the prosecutor to negotiate Caleb's charges. Given the blackmail and coercion, they agreed to reduce the charges to assault with mitigating circumstances. Caleb would plead guilty, do community service, attend counseling, and be on probation until 18. His record would be sealed if he completed everything successfully. The deal meant Caleb avoided juvenile detention, but he still had to face what he'd done. The victim impact statements were brutal. Mitchell's parents talked about their son's permanent nerve damage in his arm. He'd never play guitar again, something he'd been passionate about since he was 6. Austin's parents describe his nightmares and fear of going back to school. Liam's statement was the worst. He'd developed PTSD and panic attacks. Couldn't be in crowded spaces anymore. His college plans were on hold while he worked with therapists. Hearing the damage made me physically ill. Caleb sat there crying silently. When it was his turn to speak, he could barely get words out. I'm so sorry. I know sorry doesn't fix anything. I know you're hurt because of me. I was scared and I made the worst possible choice. I should have told my parents. Should have gone to the police. I let fear control me and you paid the price. His voice broke completely. I hate what I did. I hate that I hurt you. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for it somehow. The judge sentenced him to 200 hours community service, mandatory therapy, and 3 years probation. She also ordered him to write monthly letters to the victims describing his rehabilitation progress. She said Caleb needed to understand the lasting impact of his choices, even though he'd been coerced. Derek's trial happened 3 months later. The prosecution presented testimony from 11 students he'd blackmailed. The pattern was clear and damning. Derek showed no remorse. In his statement, he claimed he was teaching people important lessons about consequences and power, that everyone was too soft and needed to learn how the real world worked. The jury convicted him on all counts. He got 8 years in prison with possibility of parole after 5. His parents sat in the courtroom looking destroyed. They'd had no idea what their son was doing. Caleb's recovery was slow and painful. The therapy helped, but he struggled with guilt constantly. He'd wake up from nightmares where he was attacking the boys over and over. His therapist said it was a form of PTSD from being forced to commit violence against his nature. Dr. Sandra Chen specialized in coercion trauma, and she worked with Caleb twice a week. She explained that what Derek did was a sophisticated form of psychological torture. He'd identified Caleb's core values, family approval, academic success, following rules, and then threatened to destroy all of them. He'd backed Caleb into a corner where every option felt impossible. The photos weren't even real. Forensic analysis showed they'd been heavily edited. Caleb had never actually consumed drugs or alcohol. Derek had staged everything digitally, but Caleb hadn't known that. He'd believed the threat was real and acted to protect himself. That knowledge helped slightly, but didn't erase what he'd done. Mitchell Hayes refused all contact with Caleb for the first year. His parents felt Caleb had taken something irreplaceable from their son, and no apology would fix it. Caleb accepted that. He wrote letters anyway as the judge ordered, sending them through his lawyer. Mitchell never responded. Austin Murphy's family was slightly more open. After 6 months, Austin agreed to a restorative justice meeting mediated by trained counselors. Austin and Caleb sat across from each other in a small room at the community center. Austin spoke first about his fear and pain, about the months of physical therapy for his ribs, about how he flinched when people moved too fast near him. Caleb listened without interrupting. Then he explained what had happened to him, the blackmail and coercion, and was clear that it didn't excuse what he'd done, but wanted Austin to know the full story. At the end of the 2-hour session, Austin said he believed Caleb was genuinely sorry, that he could see Caleb was a victim too, though that didn't erase Austin's own trauma. They wouldn't be friends, but Austin could accept Caleb's apology and move forward. That small moment of peace helped Caleb more than anything else. Liam Foster's response was different. His family had fought Derek from the beginning, so they understood coercion better than most. 6 months after everything, Liam's dad reached out and asked if Caleb would be willing to speak to other students about what happened, share his story as a warning about blackmail and coercion. Caleb was terrified, but agreed. The first presentation was at our local high school's assembly. Caleb stood on stage in front of 400 students and told them everything. The party, the photos, the threats, the violence. He described the moment of choosing between impossible options and making the worst choice. He showed them the fake photos and explained how easy it is to fabricate evidence in the digital age. He talked about the permanent damage he'd caused to 3 innocent people and how he'd live with that guilt forever. The assembly was silent, except for Caleb's voice. When he finished, students asked questions for an hour. Many admitted they'd been in similar situations, pressured by older students, threatened with social media exposure, forced to do things they knew were wrong. Caleb's story gave them permission to speak up. The school started a reporting program where students could anonymously report blackmail or coercion. Within 2 weeks, they'd uncovered 3 more cases of students being manipulated. Caleb's presentation was so effective that other schools wanted him to speak. Over the next year, he visited 15 schools across the state. Each time, he told his story and more students came forward. He became an advocate for victims of coercion while acknowledging his own role as someone who'd committed violence. The duality was complex, but important. He was both victim and perpetrator, suffering and causing suffering. Understanding that nuance helped other students in similar situations see that they had choices even when it didn't feel like it. Dr. Chen said Caleb was turning his trauma into purpose, which was the healthiest response possible. It didn't erase what happened, but it gave meaning to the suffering. 2 years after the incident, Mitchell Hayes reached out through his parents. He'd been following Caleb's advocacy work online. He wrote a letter saying he respected what Caleb was doing and could see genuine change. He still struggled with his injury every day, but he didn't hate Caleb anymore. He understood Caleb had been used as a weapon by someone else. The letter ended with an invitation to meet in person. They met at a coffee shop with both sets of parents present. Mitchell's arm was in a brace he'd need to wear during physical activities for the rest of his life. The nerve damage was permanent. He'd adapted but lost his dream of being a professional musician. Caleb started to apologize again, but Mitchell stopped him. "I've heard your apologies. I believe you're sorry. What I want now is for you to keep doing what you're doing. Keep telling students about coercion. Keep preventing this from happening to others. That's the only thing that makes any of this mean something." The conversation lasted 3 hours. By the end, they weren't friends, but they'd reached understanding. Mitchell gave Caleb permission to share his specific story in future presentations if it would help other students. That permission felt like forgiveness, even though Mitchell was clear it wasn't forgiveness, just acceptance. Caleb's community service hours were completed through volunteering at youth crisis centers. He answered hotlines where teenagers called about abuse, coercion, blackmail. His personal experience made him uniquely qualified to help them. Many callers specifically asked for him after hearing about his story. He helped dozens of kids escape situations similar to what Derek had put him through. That work became his mission. Derek was released on parole after serving 5 years. The parole conditions were strict. No contact with minors, mandatory therapy, GPS monitoring. He'd been required to complete rehabilitative programs in prison, but staff reported he'd shown minimal engagement or remorse. He went through the motions without genuine change. 2 weeks after release, he violated parole by creating fake social media accounts to contact former victims. He was sent back to prison to serve the remainder of his sentence. Some people don't change. Some people enjoy the power too much to let it go. The system gave him a second chance, and he threw it away immediately. The parole board noted in their report that Derek showed characteristics of antisocial personality disorder and posed ongoing risk to the community. Caleb graduated high school on time despite everything. His grades had suffered initially, but he'd worked with tutors to catch up. Several colleges accepted him, but he chose to attend community college close to home. He wasn't ready to leave his support system. He majored in psychology with focus on coercion and social manipulation. His lived experience combined with academic study made him incredibly insightful. Professors frequently asked him to guest lecture in their classes. By the time he transferred to a 4-year university, he'd published 2 papers in psychology journals about adolescent vulnerability to blackmail. His criminal record was sealed as promised. The assault charges wouldn't appear on background checks. Legally, it was like it never happened. But emotionally, Caleb carried it every day. Dr. Chen said the guilt would never completely disappear, and that was okay. It meant he understood the weight of what he'd done. The goal wasn't to forget, but to integrate the experience into his identity in healthy ways. 3 years after graduating college, Caleb opened a nonprofit organization called Second Choice. It provided resources for teenagers facing coercion, blackmail, or manipulation. They ran a 24-hour crisis line, offered legal support, connected victims with therapists, and did prevention education in schools. The organization helped over 500 teens in its first year. Mitchell Hayes joined the board of directors. So did Liam Foster. Austin Murphy contributed as a donor but wasn't ready for direct involvement. The 3 boys Caleb had hurt were now part of his mission to prevent others from experiencing what they'd all gone through. The full circle was imperfect and painful, but it was something. Justice, healing, and redemption never look like the movies. They're messy and incomplete, and everyone still carries scars. But sometimes you can build something meaningful from the wreckage. 5 years after the incident, Caleb was invited to speak at a national conference on adolescent crime and rehabilitation. He shared the stage with psychologists, law enforcement, and policymakers. His presentation focused on how the justice system handles coerced minors and why punishment-only approaches fail to address root causes. He advocated for trauma-informed responses and rehabilitation programs. The speech was powerful enough that 3 states adopted new protocols for evaluating coercion in juvenile cases. I sat in the audience watching my son speak with authority and compassion about one of the worst experiences of his life. I thought about that phone call from Principal Davis 5 years ago, how everything had seemed destroyed, how I'd thought we'd lost Caleb forever to the justice system and guilt. But here he was, turning pain into purpose and horror into help. He'd never stopped carrying what he'd done to those 3 boys. The guilt was permanent, but he'd chosen to let it fuel something positive rather than destroy him. After the conference, we had dinner with Mitchell, Austin, and their families. Austin had finished physical therapy and could breathe normally again, though he still had anxiety in crowded spaces. He'd started college and was studying social work, wanting to help others process trauma. Mitchell had learned to play guitar with adapted techniques that worked around his nerve damage. He'd never play professionally, but he played for himself, and that was enough. He'd also become an advocate for victims' rights in juvenile cases. Liam had graduated with a degree in criminal psychology and was working as a consultant, helping identify coercion and manipulation in criminal cases. He used his own experience to recognize patterns others missed. The 3 of them had taken their trauma and transformed it, not erased it, but transformed it into meaning and purpose. Denise held my hand under the table as we listened to them talk about their lives and plans. Our family had been shattered by what happened, but we'd rebuilt something different. Not better or worse, just different. More aware, more careful, more empathetic to others experiencing similar pain. Caleb would never be the innocent kid he was before Derek targeted him. That version of him was gone, but the man he'd become was stronger and more compassionate. He understood human vulnerability and cruelty in ways most people never would. He used that understanding to help others. That was the only victory possible from such tragedy. Some people asked if I'd forgiven Caleb for what he'd done. The question always confused me because Caleb didn't do anything to me. He'd been tortured and manipulated into hurting others. The people who needed to forgive him were Mitchell, Austin, and Liam, and they'd each reached their own forms of peace with it. Not forgiveness exactly, but acceptance and understanding. My role as his father wasn't to forgive, but to support his journey toward becoming someone who could live with what happened, to help him transform guilt into action, to show him that one terrible moment didn't define his entire existence, even though it would always be part of his story. As I watched him at that dinner, laughing with the young men he'd once hurt, I felt something close to gratitude, not for what happened. Nobody should be grateful for trauma, but for what had been built from it, for the fact that 7 people, Caleb, Mitchell, Austin, Liam, and their families, had chosen healing over hatred, growth over stagnation, and purpose over despair. Derek Vaughn would spend his life hurting people because that's who he chose to be. But everyone else at that table had chosen differently. They'd chosen to break the cycle, to transform victim into survivor and survivor into advocate. The scars remained. The damage was permanent, but they weren't letting it be the end of the story. That was as close to a happy ending as real life offered, and somehow, it was enough. Appreciate you watching this far. If you enjoyed it, drop a like, leave a comment, and subscribe so you won't miss the next story.